opposition parties in Parliament have called on the Speaker of the National Assembly, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, to step down. Now, this comes after her Johannesburg home was yesterday raided by the Investigative Directorate following allegations of corruption. Mapisa-Nqakula is accused of allegedly soliciting a 2.3 million rand from a contractor during her tenure as Minister of Defence and Military Veterans. Now, the allegations have also been referred to the Joint Committee on Ethics and Members' Interests for investigation. So to help us discuss this further, we joined virtually now by the program head at the Public Service Accountability Monitor at Rhodes University, Zukiswa Kota. Zukiswa, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Hi, Sakina.
Zukiswa, first off, what did you make of that raid by the NPA at the Johannesburg home of the Speaker of Parliament?
Sakina, I think given the high-profile nature of the Speaker and of course the current political context, I think it is encouraging to see that kind of work by the NPA. But of course, there are many layers to it, as one can imagine. But as a first step, I think it is a good indication of the NPA, essentially conducting their work without fear or favour at this point.
So pressure is, of course, at this point mounting, as we can see, on Mapisa-Nqakula to step aside at least, or step down following that raid on her home in connection with these corruption allegations. Do you think that that's what she should do pending this investigation and its outcome?
That's an important question, and we have heard the various stances of different political parties and other commentators. And I think the important thing is to lean, on the one hand, on guidance that, as you've already mentioned, the Code of Ethical Conduct for MPs provides, and of course the rules of the National Assembly. In this instance, one of the immediate questions would be to determine the extent to which, whether or not that the Speaker has breached the Code of Ethical Conduct. And perhaps another layer to that is also to question the degree to which, regardless of the finalization of charges or progress on the investigation, if it is that the Speaker or any other member of Parliament, in needing to address such an investigation or claims or charges, then compromises on their role in Parliament, then that becomes a matter of public interest. And in this instance, we would argue that the Speaker really should consider whether or not she would be able to continue to fulfill her duties. And yes, the Parliament is winding down, but we would say that questions should be raised about interest that she did or did not disclose, and the degree to which she has breached the Code of Ethics where Parliament is concerned. And perhaps one last thing is really, we would call on the Speaker to act in good faith. And the Code of Conduct also highlights that where there is doubt, even in the context of financial misconduct, a member must then act in good faith. And so we would really call on the Speaker and the party to consider that. What does that look like? And perhaps, yes, she must step back while this investigation is underway.
So all of this taking place in the midst of a massive corruption storm in the country. The question that ordinary South Africans will ask, though, is government doing enough to deal with corruption? A bit rhetorical, perhaps, that question, but it's a question nonetheless. And considering, of course, that when the Speaker was moved from the Defence and Military Veterans portfolio, there were already allegations swirling around her. So that also gets brought into question.
Yeah, very, very important, not only in this current climate, Sakina, but we would argue, we can't say post-state capture. I'm not sure there is a post-state capture for a long time. But in this instance, certainly, where there have been allegations in the past and what we're seeing now is certainly something that should, raise the ire of the public on the one hand, but also to help us to question better what kind of prosecutorial reform and reform within the criminal justice context or criminal justice system is happening to avoid that going forward. So corruption is really a big word, a big buzzword to some extent at the moment. But some areas that perhaps are worth, are emerging green lights or green shoots in the context of reform. One is in the move to make the National Prosecuting Authority operationally and financially independent of the Department of Justice. And that's something that we've been encouraged by, and we feel that would be quite an important step to increase the NPA's independence. You'll know in the past that's been a big argument or a big concern, is the NPA adequately independent of the executive to fulfill its mandate? The second aspect is then, I believe at the moment this is currently awaiting presidential sign-off, but is the bill that seeks to amend the Independent Police Investigating Directorate. And again, there, about strengthening IPID's ability to function freely and fairly and without favour. Another important, we feel important step towards reform in the anti-corruption context. There is quite a lot of concern remaining, not least of which being the funding of entities like the NPA, which we've also spoken about in the past.
And of course, as you rightly say, quite a bit of criticism around the NPA and other entities and how they've actually come at these matters, especially those involving high-profile people and politicians. And to that point, Zukiswa, I've been reading through some of the comments because this is also the subject of our question of the day. And some of our viewers pointing out that they are actually not very confident that anything will actually be done or that things will move because they say we've seen these high-profile arrests and raids before, and then it just seems as though nothing happens post that particular event.
That's, understandable, from the public's perspective. And we ourselves have raised similar concerns that it's one thing to have, as you say, these high-profile raids, these high-profile investigations. But if at the end we don't see prosecutions as we should, or we actually just see prosecutions of what many people call the small fish in the bigger picture, that is highly problematic, and of course then serves to just further erode public trust and public confidence in anti-corruption interventions in the country. And I think perhaps another serious consideration is the extent to which, again, the lack of integration or adequate coordination of the criminal justice system or within, in order to ensure that when an investigation is underway, that ultimately the courts will be able to follow through, that the police are able to do their job, that the entire criminal justice system, in fact, is effective, is strong. And in this instance, or in this current context, we're simply not seeing that. And that's an argument that we've raised in some submissions to Parliament, for instance, really beseeching parliamentarians and MPs, ironically, to actually push much harder to see this reform and to see strengthening of the criminal justice system, so that we're not seeing more of the same, a lot of noise and very little meaningful implementation of the law at the end of the day.
And as you say, ironically, beseeching, Parliament and parliamentarians, the legislators of our nation, and unfortunately, they themselves are, the people who are facing many of these allegations as well. But then the issue of whistleblowers, if we could just touch on that very briefly, because obviously you're going to need people to actually blow the whistle on corruption in the nation. But how far can we actually take that? Firstly, in terms of protecting whistleblowers, do you think enough is being done, whether the government is proactive enough in that regard? But also, what's the point if the corruption itself permeates and extends to other arms of the criminal justice system? The police themselves, have a lot to deal with. And so where do we start? What do we do? Are we ever going to get anywhere here?
Whistleblowers and whistleblower protection, without a doubt, is really fundamental. And I think we can agree at this point that not enough is being done. We've seen recent assassinations, and I think one assassination, sort of death of a whistleblower is one too many. And the stories are just mounting really in terms of the lack of adequate mechanisms to protect whistleblowers, but also to incentivize proactive reporting, proactive identification of red flags, whether it be within the public service or, in fact, within the private sector context. I think both spaces are really rife with corruption, and there simply isn't enough protection of those who would be willing to stand up, because at this point we are seeing people lose not only their livelihoods but have lost their lives. One thing perhaps to consider is some of the work that organizations like Corruption Watch are doing to support really meaningful development of policy, but also implementation of plans, putting things into action, in the anti-corruption context. So there, at this point, isn't a lot to celebrate in that regard, but by virtue of seeing these plans in action, perhaps there is some room for some cheer. But as I say, there simply is not enough work being done to protect whistleblowers and to incentivize proactive disclosures.
Well, Zukiswa, thank you so much for helping us wade through some of these questions. Zukiswa Kota is the program head at the Public Service Accountability Monitor at Rhodes University, speaking to us about the National Prosecuting Authority's raid on the home of the Speaker of Parliament, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula.